Welcome, listeners, to the White Rabbit Chronicles. Here again is Angel and my illustrious co host, Dante.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
And thank you so much for listening to us. And I know it's been a while since we've had one of our podcasts. It does take some time to get us together and to get information together, but we promise that this will be a very interesting show. Now, in our last podcast, we talked a little bit about paranormal parasites, entities that take our energy and how we would be talking about that. And we're working off of a book by Nick Redfern called Paranormal Parasites.
Coincidence? I think not.
I think not. So there's a lot of information in the book. It's definitely worth checking out. But we wanted to give you just a brief overview of some of the important stuff to give you an idea of how this all ties in to the rest of the phenomenon that we've talked about in other shows. So first of all, as a baseline, there is different types of energy. When you've been in martial arts for a while, you hear about chi energy, qigong in China, something that that's they're part of their belief system. In Brazil, in capoeira, they have ashe. There's ki energy. Um, Reiki masters have their own type of energy that they use, that they channel. And particularly in the Hindi, the Indian tradition, there is also a type of energy called prana. And prana is life force, life energy. You hear about this a lot. They break it down into five different types. There's Vyana, which has a major effect on our minds and our emotional states. Whenever you're depleted, you run out of Vyana, you can find yourself being either very anxious or depressed. There's Apane, Apane, and that has effects on the lower part of the body. So a lack of this can cause kidney stones, uh, circulation problems in the legs, digestive issues, and whatnot. Samana is also very important. It's important for our health, and it plays a significant role in energy, particularly with the energy that we derive from eating food. So samana helps take the energy that's contained within the food and it helps distribute it in all the right places in the body. And obviously, if you become depleted in samana, this could lead to some really big problems for you because the food energy would not go to the right places. Bad things would ensue. Then we have Udana, and Udana is energy which is linked to spiritual and psychic realms. So Udana is your body's energy. It's one of the most vital energies, and it pertains particularly to the heart and to the mind. So in some of the Hindi traditions, there's an energetic loop that goes between your mind and heart, a mind heart connection. And Udana deals with that flow of energy. And it also deals with paranormal abilities such as ESP, healing, psychokinesis, clairvoyance, clairaudience, and whatnot. So, this is the breakdown of prana. It's not just one thing, it's subcategories, and it's very important.
Yes, it is. Um, Wilhelm Reich, a famous psychologist, uh, talked about orgone. That's what he called that energy, this ki, prana, etc. Um, Reich's focus was very much on sex energy, the organs and the interaction. Um, a lot of supernatural encounters are centered around areas where of high sexual activity. For
Mhm.
example, Nick Redfern talks about a lot of them taking place in lovers' lanes across the country. Um, it's nothing new to talk about sexual energetic predators. The concepts of a succubus and an incubus, one being female, the other being male. Actually, I got those transversed. Um, go back through into prehistory.
And the funny thing about Wilhelm Reich is that he did come out with the concept of orgone. He did believe that in orgasm and in sexual activity, we generate a kind of energy in the body that you can use that energy to heal yourself or to do certain things. And he got in huge trouble with the FDA. He would sell these boxes called orgone accumulators. And if you stayed inside the orgone accumulator, you could be healed of certain things. That was the idea behind orgone and how important it was. And the FDA came down on this guy really hard. They put him in jail and he died of a heart attack. Not like to say he died of a broken heart in the penitentiary in 1957. So he was shut down in 1956 and died in jail in Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary in 1957. But here's what's weird about this case. It wasn't enough for the FDA to go in and seize the orgone accumulators. They also took his books and they burned them. They burned his lab notes, they burned his books, which is very similar to what they did with Mr. Tesla. Authorities went in, they took all of his documents, made him disappear, all of his books, all of his notes, made him disappear. So some people think, hey, this guy was onto something. And then going back to the Lover's Lane beasts, it's very true that there's been many sightings of Sasquatch, different entities in places where kids tend to hang out and do what kids do. You know, you're young, horny kids. They'll find a place to get done what Mother Nature demands gets done. But the funny thing about this, and we've talked about this before in conversations we've had with younger people, um, you have to be very careful who you decide to become intimate with. I mean, the Chinese understood this. The Tao symbol, the intermingling of the energies, male and female, how each contributes to the whole, and also the idea that when you're with someone intimately, um, when you have sex with someone, you leave a piece of you energetically with them, but it's an exchange. That person leaves a piece of themselves energetically in your being, in your soul, so to speak. So if you spend a lot of time not being particularly fussy about who you sleep with, it's possible that you run across a person with very bad energy, a person that might be possessed by a demon or a disincarnate entity or crazy borderline personality disorder. And you start having sex with them. And then you find yourself getting crazier and crazier and crazier. I've talked to people who have told me that they've been in relationships with borderlines who were almost driven to the point of suicide because of the energy that that person was placing into them.
Um, there's an area in Texas called Big Thicket where a lot of these um, sightings of perhaps paranormal entities have taken place. Um, Sasquatch, the concept of a Sasquatch and a Yeti are global. Um, but again, going back to the Lover's Lane things, this the one in Texas is close to Houston. In 2003, a couple recorded that a big ape jumped on their hood when they were getting intimate and scared the crap out of them. Excuse me, am I allowed to say that? Fortunately, the guy had a shotgun in a vehicle, was able to scare the beast away by shooting at it through the windshield.
Wow.
Um, in in the UK, there's an area called Bolam Lake. Uh, it's another hotspot for young lovers on Fridays and Saturday nights. There have been many sightings of a shadow-like Bigfoot creature. Um,
Yeah, I read a little bit about that, and apparently it's like a Bigfoot mixed with a shadow person, and it just hangs around this particular area, particularly wherever there's young people getting it on, having sex. It just makes appearances,
is that the one where it like disappeared? It like faded away or something, where you could tell it wasn't like completely solid?
like smoke. Yeah,
Yeah, is that the one that happened at Bowling Lake?
I want to say that was the one. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And the other weird one was the Goat Man, 1969, Lake Worth in Texas. And again, it's a very similar story. You know, people are parked, they're making out, they're getting both sexually excited, they're generating that energy. One of those couples, John Reichert and his wife, were down there with some friends, and the wife said that while they were getting it on at midnight, which is the classical witching hour, they saw a monster there, a goat man that looked like a satyr or satyr from Greek mythology,
Satyr,
a
yeah,
satyr,
because they had
yeah,
horns.
had the horns and the goat, the cloven hooves, and he left deep scratch marks along the side of the vehicle. So, in that kind of goes back to Greek mythology. Satyrs were these half man, half goat, very sexual, very sexual, and they represented fertility, sexuality, masculine drive. And what defined the satyr almost as much as the physical characteristics was that sexual energy that he put out there. So it's kind of interesting. There's also Mothman. Where were most of the Mothman sightings?
Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
Yes. And where in Point Pleasant? What
Well,
area?
kind of goes back to the mid to late 60s. The bulk of the sightings were at an area called TNT, but it didn't have to do with, people blowing stuff up. There was a local factory for
Yes,
dynamite.
the TNT area.
Yeah. So,
And just incidentally, that happens to be where all these sightings happen at the TNT area, where people make out, and a big chunk of those sightings was right there.
one of the things that makes these a little different is that uh, whatever creature scared these people could fly.
Yeah,
It had wings that could fly, so that was different than the typical Bigfoot, big ape-looking thing.
right. But normally, Bigfoot, they appear and they're shambling. They're a little bit slow. They don't tend to go very fast, except for the some of the missing 911, or I'm sorry, missing
411.
411 cases. Some of those they could go very quickly, and they were seen to almost teleport from tree to tree. You could just barely see this thing moving, and they were very fast. But most of the reports are they're relatively slow moving ape like creatures, but there's something mystical about them. It's almost as if they're not entirely real. It's
Well,
very
they
weird.
may be interdimensional.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too, because they say that certain areas are portal areas.
Hmm.
For example, a really good one is the Skinwalker Ranch, where all of these sightings were reported. And one of the sightings that was reported there, they said that it looked like a giant hole had appeared in the middle of space, and things were coming in and out of this portal. And how this ties in with paranormal parasites and energy is that the the lore goes that these entities require energy to be able to come through into our dimension. And in order to stay corporal, in other words, to have a body, it requires a lot of energy because these are interdimensional beings. Their essence, their flesh can't exist in this dimension without energy, which is why people say, "Hey, how come they've never found Sasquatch bones anywhere?" Or you know, any
Remains, yeah.
remains, right? Well, if they're energetic and they dissipate after the energy's gone, you're not going to find anything.
Yeah.
So there was one modern report that was a little bit disturbing, and this was also reported by Nick Redfern. He said that in 2008, they had reports of very disturbing attacks on cats, also in a lover's lane right outside of Dallas. And the way he said it, it was the cats had been dissected, and in several cases, they were actually torn apart. And this always happened during the cover of darkness. So there was a theory that was put forth that there was a group in the area that was attracted to paranormal activities, and that they were killing the cats as a form of sacrifice to their demonic deities. So local media and police covered the story, and the attacks began to increase and spread to other neighborhoods around Dallas, including Lakewood Heights, Wilshire Heights, and Midway Hollow. But most of the attacks happened in Lovers Lanes. So there's something about Lovers Lanes that has a key or a tie to the paranormal. Why would you sacrifice cats at a Lover's Lane? Why there specifically?
Um, uh, we've been playing with the sexual energy for eons. I mean, you have Kundalini in India. You have the we were just talking about the you know Pan, half goat, half man god, and it's just it's a natural thing. It's creative energy.
Right.
It's the source of creation, and so it's natural for other energy beings to want to uh, one be interested in seeing how perhaps just watching how other beings interact. I mean, you know, we've done that. And the other is being able to somehow uh, feed off that energy. Not not everything has to be eaten or drank to have an energetic effect. The
Right.
sun's rays are a perfect example, and so maybe being near uh, material beings that are being in a heightened state of a heightened energetic state, maybe it's enough to feed off of.
And it could be. I mean, we tend to think of energy as energy from the sun, energy from our food, and we get our energy from chemical reactions when you eat food, broken down in your body, and then it's broken down into sugars, fats, and proteins. But if you were an interdimensional being, who's to say that you would feed off of Big Macs and Doritos, right? Um, if we don't even understand the dimension that you came from, it's just as likely that emotions are a form of energy. So the higher the emotions, and the emotions of fear, that's a very strong emotion. It's one of the oldest and strongest emotions, or the emotion of ecstasy at the point of orgasm, that could release a ton of energy. And if these beings eat energy, if that's what they do, that's perfect for them. Going to a lover's lane would be like going to a battery or to a gasoline station to fuel up.
A lot of areas that are highly energetic like this are sealed off and made into like wildlife sanctuaries.
Yes.
This is the cover that the government uses for areas that are just have too much paranormal activity for regular folk to be exposed to.
Right. The end or areas, classical ley line areas, they'll build a church where the ley lines intersect. These just areas of power that many of us don't understand, but people that deal with religion, the temple builders, the government,
A whole lot of churches, if not most of them, were built on top of other temple sites.
mhm, and those other temple sites were not there by accident. They were picked
Exactly.
out very carefully.
Exactly.
So I want to talk about a different type of a monster, and just to kind of leave off the last bit I want to mention about sexual energy is that when I studied chaos magic and the way that they did their magic, one of the ways that they would do their magic is that they would create a sigil with an intent inside the sigil. And after you've created the sigil, you have to energize the sigil. You have to put it into your subconscious mind, but also give it energy. And there was different ways of doing it, including meditation, dancing around, certain yogic poses that would make you almost pass out. But the most common way of energizing a sigil, the classical way, was creating a sigil and masturbating, and at the point of orgasm, looking directly at the sigil and drinking it in with your mind. So even chaots, as they like to call themselves, chaos magicians, know that the power of sexual magic, Aleister Crowley, huge, 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 huge proponent of sexual magic, they all knew that there was energy involved in the sexual act. So if they know it, these entities obviously know about this also.
Well, another ancient Chinese secret. They have a thing they call the deer exercise for both male and female, and it's a way of rather than expending your energy, you recycle it. There is a point in your perineum that you would hold down as you start to release, and instead of the liquid energy coming out, it
Hmm.
gets recycled in your body, and
Wow.
it's you don't get that oh my God, I got to go to sleep now because I've just expended all this tremendous energy. Rather, it's invigorating.
It builds you up instead of tearing you down.
Yeah.
That makes a lot more sense. Now, I want to go on to some more of the paranormal entities that were seen and reported on by Nick Redfern. One of the really crazy ones were the black-eyed children.
Oh yeah, this is one of my favorites.
Yeah, black-eyed children are, in case you don't know about these are typically two. They're always found in pairs, sometimes a little bit more. They're somewhat related to Men in Black stories because the descriptions are similar as far as dressed all in black, thin, sometimes very tall, not always, but sometimes tall. But these are always children. And they're typically dressed in black hoodies pulled over so that you have a hard time seeing their eyes, but you can see their eyes if you look close enough. And the first report, or the first very famous report, was from a guy called Brian Bethel. He was a journalist for the Abilene Reporter News, and he said that he was at night in a car. He had gone to deposit a check at a 24-hour check deposit place at night, and he was in his car getting ready to go home when he hears a dun 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 knock on the door. And outside, he said he saw two children and they were asking him to give them a ride. Hey, could you give us a ride? They said that they wanted to get a ride to go see a movie called Mortal Kombat that was out at the time. And he said that for some reason he was almost convinced to give these kids a ride. But then he noticed that there was something funny about these kids. First of all, they were very pale, very thin. They looked like they hadn't eaten in a long time. But then he said he saw their eyes. And the way he described it was no pupil, no iris, just jet black orbs instead of eyes, just all black. And when he wouldn't open the door to his car, they got really frustrated. And he saw that one of them was going to go for the door handle in the car, and he just punched it. He got out of there. He did not want to be in that area. But later on, he said that he felt very drained of energy, as if something had been feeding on him. So that was considered for him to be a very weird paranormal experience. And if you look at the black eyed children as a whole, they have commonalities. First, very pale skin, like the dead. You know, old vampire stories talk about vampires being very pale because they're dead and they don't have any blood. And totally black eyes, coal black, no iris, no visible pupil. And here's what always gets me about the stories. Whenever they knock on someone's door, they must be invited in. Where have we heard that before?
Yeah, exactly.
Vampires. A vampire cannot cross the threshold, cannot come into your house unless he's invited in. Some demon stories are the same way. You have to let them in. And also, one of the things that's funny about them is that they have apparent mind control. So when they're knocking on your door in the middle of the night, asking you to come in and asking for food, a lot of the times they're like, feed us. We're homeless. We don't have any food. We're very hungry. Feed us. The people inside the house become convinced that it's a good idea to let them in as if they're under a spell.
Well, vampires are also supposed to have a hypnotic effect on people that kind of, it's almost like you're able to keep your prey, you freeze your prey before you eat it.
Right. And the Bram Stoker talks about how seductive Dracula was and how women could not resist his charms and he got inside their head and these black-eyed kids do the very same thing. Another thing that's funny about them is they speak in monotone, like no inflection, and sometimes they use words that are outdated. Some people have said, I believe John Keel once wrote, that it's almost as if they're pretending to be human, but they're not quite human.
Like they're reading off an old script.
Very old. They gave them like an old 1950s. Well, think about this though. You know how they say that all these TV shows, that the waves from the radio waves of the old TV programs are still propagating out in space, and planets that are many light years away from us right now could be receiving signals of old 1940s, 1950s television, black and white television programs. And if they think that that's how we communicate, they show up saying, "Hey, that's groovy, jinkies."
As much as they used to play "I Love Lucy" over and over and over again, man,
Ah,
they're gonna show up, singing Babalu.
Babalu, yeah, Babaluaye, which happens to be Babaluaye happens to be an Orisha.
Yeah, snuck
Interesting.
that in right. Yeah,
Yeah, very sneaky, Mr.
coincidence
Ricky.
again? I think not.
I think not. So,
Well, back in 2012,
mhm,
back to Point Pleasant, there was that woman named Marie who there was, like you said, it's late at night, uh, two kids in hoodies. But was weird was uh, they ended up transforming into lizard beings before they vanished.
yes,
Okay, so that one was a little bit different from a lot of other ones because you don't really hear that one too much.
that one is a really weird case. And I remember reading about this too that they were knocking on the door, demanding to be let in for food, classical. And she said that you know how you see a road in the middle of a summer day and there's like a heat shimmer?
Yeah.
She said that that's what they look like. And then in a flash, lizard people. And unless Hillary Clinton was knocking on their door at night, which I doubt, something's there. Maybe they were reptilians.
Yeah.
Possible.
Actually, their reptilians are supposed to be able to shapeshift.
Yes.
At least some of them.
They can blend into human society, take up high positions of power. Just, yeah.
You know, um, there's I heard I don't know if you've ever seen the movie or TV show Stargate.
Yeah, yeah.
They the really bad guys are the ones that get taken over by a small reptilian that goes in like the back of their neck,
Hmm.
and it goes in, attaches to their brain, and takes over their consciousness, takes over their body. I did hear on the podcast of different types of reptilians, including ones that are about a foot and a half, 2 feet tall,
Hmm.
who have red scales and have a like a third eye horn that when they this horn will like shoot out into a human being's eye and then use the eye to go into the brain and take over that person's consciousness. So
Wow.
um, basically, I guess it's the body that was in before. I'm not sure they didn't say what happens to that one, but the new one, you become demonically possessed by this reptilian being, but it's still your body, still you. So you got to wonder. Oh, and recently saw a video where I believe it was the governor of Colorado.
Hmm.
His one of his eyes, uh, you could see it shapeshift into reptilian, and it was caught. We were like watching it over and over again. I caught it on a podcast of Edge of Wonder.
Okay, okay.
Um, and what was interesting is I shared it to myself to my own text, and it's gone. My text that where I saved the text that I saved,
Hmm.
it's gone.
Huh. That's kind of weird.
This is weird. Yeah.
That's a little bizarre. Maybe somebody doesn't want you
I
to
don't know. I don't
save
know.
that video.
That's weird. 'Cause I saved a lot of different videos, and most of them are still there as far as I
Huh. Well,
know.
here's the interesting thing. The black eyed children have, in this case, particularly the Point Pleasant case, after these kids disappeared for days, this woman that saw them said that she felt completely drained and could barely walk. She just felt that something had been sucked out of her. There was another encounter, and this happened in Oklahoma, March 2011. Knock at the door, 8:30 p.m. A boy and girl that appeared to be about 11 to 12 years of age, the classical black hoodies, black eyes, asking for food. We need to eat. We need to eat. May we come in? And he said that the funny thing about it was, this guy's name, his last name was Martin. He said that they used may we instead of can we, which is more common. And it sounded, he said that the way they talk sounded like the way people used to talk way back when. So something's not right with their programming, but the reports of these people saying that all of a sudden they feel deathly ill after these encounters. He, for example, this case in Oklahoma, he said that he felt as if he hadn't eaten in days after the encounter, and he found himself feeling like as if as he himself was starving. but it was the children who were outside who said that they needed to eat. And they said that, so this is happening during the encounter. The kids are outside, they're knocking at the door, asking, hey, can you let us in? We're hungry, we need to eat. And then all of a sudden, the person who is having this encounter begins to feel as if they themselves have not eaten in days, that they're starving. So it was almost as if, as or whenever you're in the presence of these beings, in some way, just having this interaction with them causes you to become energetically depleted. And maybe when they ask you to let them in, they don't really care if you let them through the door. They're getting their food right then and there.
And this is not completely a modern thing either. There is a report of a woman who talked about having a similar event back in 1923.
Hmm.
Um, she was 18 at the time, and it's the usual thing, you know, the it was in the early hours of a particular morning. Um, she woke up and these kids were standing next to her bed, and actually it was just one kid. It's a young boy standing next to a bed, and he points at her, and she suddenly like loses all her energy,
Huh.
and she got freaked out. You know, the boy disappeared. She got freaked out. You know, ran to her parents. But this happened like four days in a row, where she'd wake up and there'd be this kid there, and suddenly he'd point, and all her energy would be drained,
Wow. So they are taking
and he had black
something,
eyes.
and the
So that's
black
what freaked
eyes.
her out. That's why she ran screaming to her parents. Was this little black-eyed boy sitting there waking? She's waking up and he's next to her bed each time.
So I think the takeaway here is if you ever receive a knock at the door at 10 o'clock at night and you see kids outside asking to be let in, and they have big black eyes with no no visible whites of the eyes,
Yeah.
maybe letting them in is not a very good idea.
If you can't see the white of their eyes, then you shoot, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. But if they have no white of the eyes, don't open the
Don't open
door.
it.
Do not. So we're gonna go now into shadow people, and this is an entire podcast by itself. It's impossible to cover the whole shadow person phenomenon just in the time that we have here today. But there is a connection with energetic feeding and the shadow people. So the shadow people have been around for quite a while, and there have been books written about this, many podcasts. One of the most famous one was an old Art Bell podcast that I'd heard about, where he talked about the subject, and many people. He received hundreds, if not thousands, of letters from people saying that they'd cited these things. So there was an interesting book called The Shadow People Among Us, and this came out in 2009. And the way he described them is that, at least the types of shadow peoples that we know about, he thinks of them as benign shadows, shadows of terror, red eyed shadow. He says that there's sometimes red eyed shadow cats and the Hat Man. So when people report these things, it's not always the same type of shadow person. Some of them they look like smoke fog type monsters. Some of them are noisy shadows, almost like poltergeists. Some of them are wearing hoods, which I've heard people talk about. But the very common one is the Hat Man. It's like a shadow made of smoke wearing a hat. And the eyes are sometimes described as luminescent, like glowing red, um,
I thought I
glowing
was
green,
red. Mine had yellow.
yellow. Yeah, that's another color that's possible. So they have energy coming from the inside. So here's a story that was related to the author of this book. The story goes, Dear Heidi, I was maybe 5 years old when the Hat Man started to visit me. Every night I would lay on the top of my bunk bed and watch as my door would crack open for him to creep inside. As high up as I was, I would still have to look up to see him. So, in other words, he was taller than the bunk bed. She had to look up to see him, and I would freeze in horror at the sight of him. And according to this witness, the Hat Man would lunge towards her at a phenomenal speed and would always say these words: one day I will have you.
Um, I was 11 when I had my Shadow Man, my second Shadow Man experience, and this is the one where I could see his eyes. He, as I talked about in our intro, um, just late at night, maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. I, had gone to bed and turned off my radio, and as soon as I turned off my radio, in the opposite corner where the door was, this shadow figure showed up, and it was because of the way the light fell from my window. It was half in shadow and half in the light,
Wow.
but it was still darker than the shadow. The part of it that was in shadow was darker than the shadow, so it was like solid black except for these golden, like blazing eyes. But it definitely was a character with that wide brim hat. And I turned around to the wall and started crying and praying, and I'd peek around and it like play with me, and it would like when it would get closer to me, it would feed off my fear. As it would get close to me, it would like laugh. I couldn't hear it, but I could feel it like laughing and playing with my fear. And the more scared I got, the more it intensified. So it was extremely scary. I ended up crying myself to sleep probably for like 2 hours.
Was it the same as the being that you saw that had, it was like thin, almost
No,
different?
no, very completely different. The sideways person, as I call him, was not scary at all. It looked like a human being squashed flat to look like a cartoon-like. But it wasn't scary. It was just I woke up one night and uh, I'd fallen asleep with the light on, which was very unusual.
Hmm.
I had come out of a scary dream where I was like being cornered by shadow beings.
Wow.
I could see this like in front of me in my dream. I could see an open doorway, like I was in a barn or a warehouse or something. There's a big door right in front of me. I tried to move forward and I couldn't. So I moved side to side, but these energy beings were cornering me from each side, so I couldn't go forward, and they wouldn't let me go sideways. So I popped out of my dream, and when I woke up, there was a little guy sitting on the chair at the foot of my bed, and because I'd come out of a scary dream, I reacted in fear, and I jumped up to attack it because I've trained myself to attack my fears.
Right.
Ever since that shadow man fed off my fear, I learned to use rage to overcome my fear. And so I jumped up, and the character slid into midair, sideways into nothing. And I started thinking about it, but it wasn't scary looking. So it wasn't a demon. And if it was something that was more powerful than me, it would have just ate me as I attacked it.
Right.
Um, it was weird. It just looked like a flat person sitting there looking at me, kind of. I don't know if its eye blinked or it winked in those 2 seconds before I jumped up. But what was really neat was I could only see one eye, and the one eye looked like a diamond flattened, like a crystal,
Huh.
like a flat crystal.
Almost like crystalline
Yeah,
structure.
very crystalline. So I think as it moved its head or it blinked or something, its eyes shifted. It was kind of cool, but again disappeared into midair, like if there was a string hanging from the ceiling to the floor, it like slid into the string.
It almost sounds like you had a visit by an interdimensional or maybe even extraterrestrial type being.
Yeah.
Somebody that can play with dimensions or slip through dimensional doors.
Well, interestingly, in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, it talks about other dimensions being 90 degrees sideways.
Yes, I've heard
So
about that. Yeah.
if you can flatten yourself, or you can change your depth, you can go sideways.
Yeah, the Japanese have a whole classification of monsters. I believe they call them yokai. And one of the yokai, if in their tradition, they have thousands of these things, and they invent these a lot. But one of their yokai lives in corners, in different in spaces that are relatively hidden. So they play with the geometry. the 90-degree angles of a corner, and they can use these corners to slip in.
Well, it's interesting that you say the corner because the Shadow Man at 11 was in the corner, but the one at 5 um, popped up in the middle of of an alleyway,
Hmm.
and after it disappeared, it 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 was too fast for it to have run, one direction or the other. It had to have disappeared either sideways or just, you know, I don't know, midair
Or
completely.
dissipate somehow.
But it definitely disappeared.
Wow. Remember having my Shadow Man experience when I was around, I want to say about 12, 13 years of age, playing around like an idiot with the Necronomicon, messing around like a moron. And I remember after one night of playing around with stuff, the spells that were in the book, uh, going to sleep, sleep paralysis, eyes open, and right above me, I see a portal open up. There was a black hole in my ceiling open up, and I saw hands going through this black hole. I remember the two hands, and it was as if this thing was pulling itself through. Imagine a man pulling himself out of a manhole. This guy was pulling himself through, and I remember he had the wide brim classical hat, and he had shark type teeth. He had a big smile with shark type, like animal like teeth. And he had these black sunglasses on, and he was just smiling at me. And he said something to the effect that, I'm coming for you, I'm coming for you. And he just kept getting closer and closer. And I screamed myself awake, and he just vanished in a second. I also remember talking to my brother. He used to go running, jogging at night. And he told me that one night he was jogging and that he saw a man walking towards him. So he'd already stopped. He was doing his cool down, and he saw a man walking towards him wearing a hoodie, of all things. And he said that as the man approached him, he looked where the hoodie was, and he said that instead of having a normal face, it was all black inside, completely black. Uh, all he could see were
Excuse me.
two red eyes, but all black, no visible face, just two red eyes inside. Imagine a hoodie, and all you see inside is darkness, no face, just two eyes. Wow, no bueno.
Yeah. Well, uh, at 5 years old, I was walking home through an alleyway. It was nighttime. It was about 8 o'clock at night, and there was light up ahead. I was kind of in the darkness, going toward the light, the way the this particular alley was at that time. And so all of a sudden, a large, presumably male entity, all in shadow, wearing a hat. Uh, don't remember seeing any eyes. It was actually kind of far. It was probably uh, at least 30, maybe 40 feet away. But I froze. What I thought at the time, I thought I froze in fear, but it may have been one of those like UFO things where you can't, you're not, you're, something takes over and you can't move. But at the time, I froze, presumably in fear, staring at this character. And after a couple of seconds, 2, 3 seconds maybe, um, there was a voice that said, "He is not for you."
Wow.
And about a second or two later, that entity disappeared. I tried to remember, did I blink? Did it run on one side or the other? No, it somehow disappeared too quick for it to have been natural. But that voice was I could hear it inside my head more so than with my ears. So again, going back to perhaps advanced technology, they
Mm-hmm.
have now what they call voice to skull technology, where it sounds like God is talking to you in your brain,
Yeah.
right inside your mind. Um, Maybe there's a correlation.
Well, I know that I mean, even a few years back, 15 years back, they had bone conduction earphones that you could buy that would vibrate a bone inside your jaw, and the sound wasn't coming from a normal speaker. It was vibrating the bones inside your skull, and it sounded like you could hear the voice, but it was inside your head. Then there was reports that they came out that the government, the CIA particularly, was working on modulated microwave technology. And apparently they found out that if you modulate microwaves, low energy microwaves, not enough to like fry an egg or anything. This is low level energy. You can make people hear voices through that modulation inside their heads as if it's coming from the inside. So, yeah,
And it's voice to skull technology.
voice to skull technology. Yeah. So I want to also double back on the shadow people. There's another very interesting story that came out. This is 1967. The name of the person reporting this, her name was Margaret, the experiencer's name. She was 25 years old, and normally she was a working class, worked every day for a living, and she lived in an English city called Bristol, very famous British city. And she said that at night she began to get visits from a shadow-like being, always at night when she'd moved to that city and moved to a new place. And she said that when it would appear, it would bend down close to her and that it would sometimes kiss her on the lips. So she said that she had an experience where it bent down, kissed her on the lips, and she tried to scream as the thing put its black lips to hers. And in Margaret's own words, she said it began to take my life away as if it was pulling the life out of me. Then all of a sudden the shadow was gone. And she said that over the course of the next few months, the very same thing happened on four subsequent occasions. But the weird part of the story, I mean, as if having a shadow being kiss you at night wasn't weird enough, was that on one occasion, as the shadow was getting ready to exit her room, and this is interesting, she said that the shadow man morphed into the shape of a large black cat that leapt off of her bed, just jumped off, and vanished into the darkness of the room. Can you imagine that?
Well, it's an old story of cat stealing the breath of newborns.
Yeah.
Back to in 1233, Pope Gregory the Ninth, who maintained that cats were in league with the devil, had as many killed as was conceivably possible. And I love cats, and that's a horrible
And because they got rid of all the cats, what happened? Oh no.
thing. Yeah, the wasn't it something called like the Black
Black
Plague because of
plague?
too many rats and not enough cats?
Yes, great going, Pope Gregory the Ninth.
Yeah, yeah.
So now we're gonna go into a different area.
Oh,
These
wait,
are the
wait, wait. I
oh,
want to talk about one thing. Have
sure,
you
sure.
ever seen a movie called The Entity
Yes,
with Barbara
classical.
Hershey back in like the 80s, right?
Yes,
Well, it's
classical.
a true story. I think the lady's name was Doris Bither. She had like three or four sons, and
Hmm.
this took place in California. And she started being attacked by these invisible entities.
Yes.
And as she said it, she was actually attacked by three entities. Two smaller ones would hold her down, while the third bigger one would basically violate her sexually, but she couldn't see him. But the kids could see the result of the being there at times. Sometimes they would even be able to see almost smoky, like well, the jinn are famous for being made of smoke, right?
Right.
And so, but yeah, this lasted for years. She actually had paranormal investigators come in, and what was messed up was whenever the investigators would leave, the kids knew that the attacks would get worse. Like the beings would get pissed off, uh, for her allowing them to try to catch them. Very interesting story. Like I said, the attacks lasted for years
Right.
until she finally died in like her early 40s or something.
Yeah, that was a classical case. It happened in Culver City.
Culver City.
Culver City, and it was covered in the movie. And it was also the one of the lead paranormal investigators. And there was a little bit of a controversy, uh, but the lead guy was Barry Taff, Dr. Barry Taff. Um, so Barry Taff was working in a parapsychology lab that was being run by the late Thelma Moss, and he did the preliminary interview. He went in and did the research, and I heard Barry Taff in an interview online on a podcast, and he said everything that you saw in the movie, it was slightly dramatized, but it wasn't very dramatized. That these things actually happened to her, that she was physically attacked. Barry Taff said that some of his crew who were doing the paranormal investigation, they were attacked by whatever was in the house. So it wasn't just going after her, it was going after them also.
The kids too.
The kids, too, were also being victimized. So there's something there. Whoever says that ghosts are just all in your mind, you gotta be careful. You have to be very, very careful. So we can't obviously go through the entire book and every single category of paranormal parasites, but I do want to talk a little bit about hungry ghosts. And this is classical when we've talked a little bit about this before. But for those of you that need a little bit of a refresher, a hungry ghost is a concept that is central in the Sikh and the Buddhist traditions. And essentially, the way it works is that if you practice things in life that went against the rules of the Sikh tradition, so if you engaged in anger, greed, lust, if you you know gave preference to your ego and your ego attachments, you were very attached in life to sex, gluttony, food, any of the classical mortal sins. If you went against the traditional teachings, they believed that when you died, there was a very good chance that after death you would come back in the form of a hungry ghost. And the hungry ghost can be seen as a literal thing where it was a being that had a long mouth with a very, very small mouth. Very tiny mouth, but it was long, almost like a beak, and a very thin neck, but a gigantic, very large, distended stomach. And these beings are always hungry. They're always hungry. They never stop being hungry. And the problem is that because of their mouth, they can never be full. They're always hungry, but they can never be full. They can never be fulfilled. And the way they tie this in with parasite being fed upon by different monsters is that there are stories in the lore. They talk about how a hungry ghost, one of these things that comes back, can sometimes, well, first of all, they're filled with frustration, torment, rage. They're being punished and they know they're being punished. They screwed up, but they still hunger for the pleasures of the flesh. So sometimes they can possess a person. So in order to be able to enjoy the things that they were able to enjoy when they lived, they can on occasion possess a person. They get inside of you and they make the person begin to either eat too much, have way too much sex. So in these traditions, the Buddhist and Sikh tradition, they warn about being very careful in certain places. They said that these hungry ghosts can live in faraway places like caves, cellars, uh, just old, dark, abandoned houses, anywhere where there's no light. And if you are either under the influence of hallucinogens, that's one case, or in a very particularly weak mental state, you're feeling insecure, you're feeling a lack of self esteem. In other words, your defenses are down because internally your inner chi energy is a little bit down. It is possible for a hungry ghost to slip in. And maybe not just one, multiples can slip in also. This is classical. They talk about this in The
The Unquiet
Unquiet
Dead.
Dead.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this is exactly tied into the things that Dr. Edith Fiore talked about in her book.
And it's a very scary thing that knowing that, for example, I work at a nightclub, and those that would be addicted to alcohol and maybe other illicit drugs, perhaps, would hang around a bar waiting for someone to be in a weakened state in order to
Yes.
attach themselves, possess them, and be able to, like you say, feed off whatever it is they're addicted to. So, whether you're gluttony, whether you're addicted to food, alcohol, drugs, sex, where it's a true addiction where you cannot It controls you rather than you control it. This thing is gonna follow you. So if you think, well, I'll just check out and start over next time. No,
No, no, no, no, no.
no, no, no. You got to deal with yourself. You have to take responsibility for yourself at all times.
And be very careful because hungry ghosts sometimes they're living people. Like addicts will find addicts.
Hmm.
Uh, People that have problems with alcohol will find other people with problems like alcohol that will latch on to them,
Yeah.
and it becomes like a loop. You can never get out of a lifestyle. You can never get out of certain bad habits because
It's a
people that are
misery loves company kind of thing.
yes, you become enmeshed with this other person or develop codependence, and things just get really, really bad very quickly. So imagine your defenses are down, a ghost, a disincarnate entity sees you, and all of a sudden jumps in, and you find yourself needing to take way too much alcohol, way too much food, way too much drugs, and you have to go to someone that knows, like Edith Fiore, some of the other psychologists that understand spirit attachment and spirit release.
Yeah, for those who start getting these suddenly becoming uh, unable to control themselves, this is definitely a sign that maybe you need to see somebody.
And they're directly taking their energy, their sustenance from you. All that energy that you're taking in, that's going to them. It's not going to you.
Yeah.
You're being sucked dry. And I like the way that the Nick Redfern describes it. He said that it's very similar to a full-blown demonic possession in which the mind of the victim is paranormally elbowed out of the picture and becomes the tool of the supernatural monster. Wow. Wow. So this leads us quite naturally, and it is the season, to a little bit of a talk about Halloween. Halloween.
Oh, where do you want to start?
Where do we begin?
Well,
Well, they said that the term was from the 1500s. Is that correct?
uh, I don't know.
All Hallows Eve,
All
perhaps?
Hallows Eve.
Yeah. And
But what's a hallow?
a hollow, a ghostly hollow,
Hallow?
I don't
Is that what that is?
remember. It's not hollow. It's
That's what I said. What? That's what I said.
Hallow.
Not a hollow. What's a hallow?
Yeah. And it was really originally it was a pagan celebration. The pagans observed this. It was originally called Samhain.
Actually, that's
And
pronounced Samhain.
Samhain, I apologize. I stand corrected. Samhain,
It is spelled Samhain.
but it's not pronounced. It's is it Gaelic?
I don't know.
Gaelic? I want to say Old English.
I'll play your silly game. Is it Gaelic?
I don't know, but it is Samhain. To everybody out there, it is not Samhain. Even if you like the heavy metal band, it's Samhain. And that day was very specific to one thing, and that was to appease the dead, to honor them, and to show the dead respect. And I'd heard and I'd read in different versions of the lore that on these days that were celebrated by the pagans, and this day in particular, not so much the spring equinox or any of the other days or the winter solstice, but this particular day, that the barrier between our world and the world of the dead, where the dead go to afterlife, became very thin.
Yeah. Well, the veil gets thin between the veil between the two worlds gets thin both on Halloween at midnight and also on April 30th at midnight, which is
Mm.
Walpurgis Night.
Walpurgisnacht,
Yeah.
yes, classical pagan.
So one of the things that says everybody wears disguises because there are things floating around. You never know. This lets you blend in with the other entities that have come through. They can't tell who you are. You're in
Right.
disguise. Hence the costumes.
So if you ever wondered, why do kids dress up in these crazy skeleton and ghost costumes? There's a reason. Parents would encourage this because the thinking of this was if my kid is dressed up like one of these monsters, the monsters won't be able to tell that this is a human,
Hmm.
and consequently they won't be fed upon by these entities. And it's interesting too that on Dia de los Muertos, one of the traditions in Mexico is to leave out bread and alcohol and other offerings to the dead. So even in the Latino tradition, the Mexican tradition, the idea is that these things, these entities, even though they're disincarnate, they still eat. They can still gain sustenance.
Hmm.
from whatever energy is contained within the food. And on that one night, you feed them. Otherwise, they feed on you.
Mhm.
And when kids go to your door and they knock saying trick or treat, basically what that really means is that will you give me food or will you pay a terrible price? So,
Treat me or I trick you.
right. So giving the kid food was in some way almost
It's
symbolic
extortion.
of, well, it's extortion, yeah. But it was almost as if you're offering food to a spirit to appease them so that they don't get back at you.
Yeah, it's protection.
Protection money. It's
Yep,
it's a racket.
it's a racket.
It-
Get all these kids on the get all these kids on the RICO Act.
so there there's so much to say about this particular topic, and we'll definitely have to keep going on a later podcast because there's just way too much to cover here. But the bottom line is to really, I mean, get your hands on this, is everything contains energy in some way. We're all vibration. Every single religious tradition understands this. All on some form of vibration. We contain energy. You watch The Matrix. The Matrix is using people as batteries. Do you think that they're trying to tell you something there? You think maybe Hollywood was trying to sneak in a little message there about how people are really used? Yes, you are energy. Yes, things feed on you. Whether people here in this on this material plane are feeding on your emotions, on your attention, or paranormal entities generate emotion within you and feed off of that emotion. Our strongest emotion is fear. That's very energetically charged emotion, and anger, these
Yeah, I would
heightened
say
emotions.
love, frankly,
Well,
but
ultimately, love
yeah,
is stronger,
our
but
strongest negative emotion, I guess, would be fear. Our strongest positive would be love, and the key uh, to staying both energetically protected and um, also be in an open state where you are able to give energy to others at the same
right,
time is to be in a state of always act in a state of love instead of acting out of a state of fear.
right, and being very careful who and you share that energy with, because the world is filled with energetic vampires, and that's a whole different category altogether. It doesn't even have to be paranormal. There's walking around type of people that will suck your energy. You'll interact with them, and within just a few minutes, you begin to feel run down, out of energy. You can barely stand anymore because they're sucking you dry, and you have no idea that they're doing this to you.
Great book for that concept is the Celestine Prophecy
Uh,
or Prophecies.
And maybe next time we'll go a little bit into the vampire legend, which talks a little bit more about this.
Right.
But for now, just remember to be safe out there. Be very careful. Listen to your heart. Listen to your emotions when people start doing this to you, or if an entity starts doing this for you. There's definitely ways that you can protect yourself. Uh, Keep your eyes open, as always, and don't always believe everything that you hear. Even here on the White Rabbit Chronicles, strongly encourage you to do your own research on any of the topics that we bring up. Come to your own conclusions, because ultimately you have to find this stuff out for yourself, just the same way as we did.
For those who've listened this long, God bless you, and hope to catch you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Peace.
Be blessed.